Jax's revenge domain. The boardroom went dead silent as my presentation slides flickered to complete garbage on the 80-inch monitor. Instead of my quarterly integration analysis, cartoon images of clowns filled the screen with incompetent flashing in bright red letters. 12 executives stared at me, waiting for an explanation I didn't have. Wesley Stone, the regional manager, cleared his throat and said, "Maybe we should reschedule when you're better prepared, Mason." That moment crystallized everything for me. My name is Mason Ward, and at 49 years old, I thought I'd seen every dirty trick in corporate America. Turns out I was wrong. Let me back up. I spent 8 years in the Navy, from 18 to 26, mostly in logistics coordination, loading cargo ships in Norfolk, managing supply chains across 3 aircraft carriers, that kind of work. Taught me to track every bolt and every dollar because when you're 200 miles from shore, missing supplies can kill people. After discharge, I spent 15 years working my way up through various manufacturing companies. Started as a plant supervisor, moved into operations management, then corporate oversight. The last 7 years I've been with Titan Industries, handling acquisitions and facility integrations. 6 months before that boardroom disaster, I'd been brought in from corporate headquarters to oversee the $75 million acquisition of Pinnacle Manufacturing. This was supposed to be routine. Integrate their systems into ours, streamline operations, cut redundancies. Standard corporate playbook stuff. Wesley Stone had run Pinnacle for 7 years like his personal kingdom. His team, Rachel Bennett as assistant manager, Cole Martinez handling operations, Grace Thompson managing client relations, and Zachary Phillips coordinating technical systems, treated him like some kind of business genius. When I arrived with my mandate to integrate Pinnacle into Titan's corporate structure, they made it clear I wasn't welcome. The exclusion started immediately. Critical supplier. Meetings happened when I was mysteriously called away to handle urgent issues that turned out to be nothing. Financial reports I requested took weeks to materialize, and when they did, key sections were always missing or being updated. My access to the plant management system kept getting revoked due to technical glitches that IT couldn't seem to fix. I'd dealt with territorial managers before during previous acquisitions, but this felt different, more systematic, more deliberate. In the Navy, we had a saying, when the supply manifests don't match the cargo, somebody's skimming. Same principle applied here. The first major red flag came during my 3rd week. I was reviewing vendor contracts and noticed something that made my logistics training kick in. Pinnacle was paying $47,000 monthly to Advanced Logistics Solutions for supply chain consulting. The contract looked legitimate on paper, but when I tried to verify the company's credentials, I hit a wall. No website, no business. Registration I could find through standard databases, no industry presence whatsoever. When I asked Wesley about it, he barely looked up from his computer. ALS has been with us for 3 years. They handle specialized inventory optimization. Very technical stuff, probably over your head. That comment alone should have been a warning sign. I'd optimized supply chains for nuclear submarines. Nothing about civilian inventory management was over my head. I'd like to review their deliverables, I said. Sure, I'll have Rachel pull those files for you. Those files never materialized. Every time I followed up, there was a new excuse. The files were in storage. They were being digitized. The consultant was updating the reports. After 2 weeks of runaround, I realized they were stalling. Meanwhile, the professional sabotage escalated beyond simple exclusion. My presentation materials were mysteriously corrupted before important meetings. Critical emails went missing from my inbox. During a major client visit, I discovered my security badge had been deactivated, leaving me locked out of the facility while our biggest customer waited inside. But the real breakthrough came when I started staying late. My executive access still worked after hours, probably because whoever was sabotaging me during the day didn't think about night shifts. That's when I found what Wesley's team thought they'd hidden. Advanced Logistics Solutions was completely fake. The address listed on their invoices led to a vacant strip mall office that had been empty for 2 years. The consulting reports they supposedly provided were generic templates downloaded from industry websites with Pinnacle's logo slapped on top. Over 3 years, Wesley's operation had funneled $1.7 million to this non-existent company. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. As I dug deeper into the financial records, I found a whole ecosystem of fraud. maintenance contracts with companies that didn't exist, insurance policies, that duplicated coverage we already had through corporate, consulting fees for everything from safety compliance to environmental assessments, all going to shell companies. The pattern reminded me of something I'd seen in the Navy. During my last deployment, we caught a supply chief who was creating fake requisitions for parts we already had in inventory. He'd order duplicates, sell the extras, and pocket the money. The scheme worked because nobody cross-checked his orders against actual inventory needs. Wesley was running the same scam, just on a much bigger scale. What made it especially clever was how they spread the fraud across different categories. No single fake expense was large enough to trigger automatic audit flags. $30,000 for HVAC maintenance here, $25,000 for safety consulting there, $47,000 monthly for supply chain optimization. Each piece looked reasonable in isolation. The more I investigated, the angrier I got, not just because they were stealing money, but because they were stealing it while pretending to be competent managers. Wesley's team acted like corporate oversight was some kind of invasion, when the real problem was they were running a criminal enterprise disguised as a manufacturing facility. That's when I realized the boardroom presentation sabotage wasn't just harassment, it was evidence destruction. They were trying to discredit me before I could expose them. The clown presentation wasn't just petty harassment, it was a preemptive strike designed to make me look incompetent so that any fraud allegations I might make would seem like desperation from a failing executive. That realization changed everything. This wasn't about territorial managers protecting their turf. This was about criminals protecting their operation. I spent the next 3 weeks conducting what I called a forensic audit, though I kept that terminology to myself. Every night after the day shift left, I'd stay behind and dig deeper into Pinnacle's financial records. My Navy training had taught me that supply chain fraud always leaves patterns, and Wesley's operation was no exception. The fake vendor scheme was more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. Advanced Logistics Solutions was just one of 7 shell companies they'd created over 5 years. There was Pinnacle Safety Consulting for $35,000 monthly in compliance fees, Industrial Maintenance Solutions billing $28,000 for equipment repairs that never happened, and Environmental Assessment Group charging $42,000 quarterly for reports that were copied from EPA websites. Each fake company had its own checking account, mailing address, and even rudimentary websites that looked legitimate at first glance. The addresses were all mail forwarding services or vacant offices. The websites were templates with stock photos and generic corporate language. But the bank accounts, those all traced back to a single business entity controlled by Wesley and Rachel. What really impressed me, in a sick way, was how they'd structured the money flow. Instead of simply cutting checks to themselves, they'd created this elaborate network that made the fraud look like legitimate business expenses. The fake consulting companies would invoice Pinnacle, receive payment, then distribute the money through a series of transfers that eventually landed in personal accounts belonging to Wesley's team. Cole Martinez had used his share to buy a $180,000 boat. Grace Thompson had purchased a vacation rental property in Myrtle Beach. Zachary Phillips was driving a BMW M3 that cost more than his official salary. Rachel Bennett had invested her cut in cryptocurrency, which explained why she was always checking her phone during meetings. But Wesley was the real mastermind. His portion of the fraud had funded a $650,000 house in an exclusive neighborhood, private school tuition for his 2 kids, and what looked like a substantial investment portfolio. The man was living like a millionaire on a middle-class manager's salary, and apparently nobody in corporate had bothered to notice. The numbers were staggering. Over 5 years, they'd stolen $12.4 million from Titan Industries through this network of fake vendors and inflated contracts. That represented about 16% of Pinnacle's total operating budget, money that should have gone to equipment upgrades, employee bonuses, or shareholder dividends. What made it especially infuriating was how they'd covered their tracks. The facility's official performance metrics looked solid because Wesley's team had been cooking the books. They'd report savings from efficiency improvements that were actually just money they'd stolen and then claimed credit for not spending. They'd inflate revenue projections to offset the fake expenses. On paper, Pinnacle looked like a well-run operation with healthy margins. The acquisition due diligence had missed all of this because Wesley's team knew exactly what corporate auditors would look for. They'd hidden the fake vendors among hundreds of legitimate suppliers. They'd spread the fraudulent expenses across multiple budget categories. They'd even created fake purchase orders and delivery confirmations to support their bogus invoices. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd gotten greedy. During my 4th week of investigation, I found evidence that they were planning to accelerate the scheme. Email threads between Wesley and Rachel discussed maximizing the transition window and taking advantage of integration chaos. They knew the corporate merger would create temporary oversight gaps, and they wanted to steal as much as possible before the new systems locked down. Cole had already submitted invoices for $85,000 in emergency equipment repairs that needed to be paid immediately. Grace was pushing through a $120,000 client retention consulting contract. Zachary had requisitioned $67,000 for critical system upgrades that existed only on paper. They were planning to steal another $272,000 in the next 30 days, bringing their total theft to nearly $13 million. And they were using my integration work as cover, claiming that all these emergency expenses were necessary to prepare for the corporate transition. The final piece of evidence I needed came from an unexpected source. While reviewing email logs, I discovered that Wesley had been communicating with someone at Titan's internal audit department. Not to report problems, but to get advance warning about any investigation activities that might affect Pinnacle. Our own auditor, someone named Jennifer Walsh, had been feeding Wesley information about corporate oversight procedures in exchange for what the emails described as consulting fees. She'd warned him about random audit triggers, told him which financial ratios got flagged for review, and even provided copies of audit questionnaires so he could prepare fake documentation in advance. That's when I realized this wasn't just local fraud, this was a conspiracy that reached into Titan's corporate headquarters. Jennifer Walsh had been helping Wesley's operation for at least 2 years, and probably taking a cut of the stolen money. I now had documentation of a criminal enterprise involving 6 people and spanning 2 corporate locations. The evidence filled 3 external hard drives: bank records, fake invoices, email threads, property purchases, and what looked like explicit planning documents for future theft. But I also had a problem. If Jennifer Walsh was compromised, I couldn't trust Titan's internal investigation procedures. Going through normal corporate channels might just give the conspirators time to destroy evidence and disappear. I needed outside help, federal help. That night, I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 separate locations: a safety deposit box, a home safe, and cloud storage with a law firm that specialized in whistleblower cases. If something happened to me, if there was an accident, or if I suddenly got fired for performance issues, the evidence would still exist. The next morning, I called Sophia Hamilton, Titan's chief operations officer. Sophia had a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to financial irregularities, and more importantly, she had direct authority over federal compliance reporting. If anyone at corporate could handle a multi-million-dollar fraud case involving federal crimes, it was her. "Mason," she answered on the first ring. "How's the Pinnacle integration proceeding? That's what I need to discuss with you, privately. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at the Marriott downtown?" "Not anywhere near either office." Her tone shifted immediately. "How serious are we talking?" "Federal investigation serious, possibly RICO charges." The silence on her end lasted about 10 seconds. Then, "I'll be there at 8 a.m. Bring everything." The next morning, I arrived at the Marriott 15 minutes early and chose a corner table where I could see the entrance. Old habits from the Navy. Always know who's coming and going. When Sophia walked in at exactly 8 a.m., I could tell from her expression that she'd spent the night preparing for the worst. "Show me," she said without preamble, sliding into the booth across from me. For the next 2 hours, I walked her through everything: the fake vendor network, the shell company bank accounts, the property purchases, the planned acceleration of theft during the integration period. I showed her Cole's boat registration, Grace's vacation rental mortgage, Wesley's house deed, and Rachel's cryptocurrency transactions. Most importantly, I showed her the email threads between Wesley and Jennifer Walsh from internal audit. Sophia studied each document with the focused intensity of someone calculating prison sentences. When she got to the financial summary showing $12.4 million in theft over 5 years, she actually winced. "This is beyond corporate fraud," she said finally. "This is organized crime, RICO territory like you said. How confident are you about this evidence?" confident enough to testify under oath in federal court. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Mark, it's Sophia. I need you at the Marriott on 5th Street immediately. Bring the full financial crimes kit." She hung up and looked at me. "Mark Brennan, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We've worked with him before on acquisition irregularities. He's trustworthy, and he's thorough." Agent Brennan arrived 40 minutes later with a laptop case and the kind of serious expression that comes from investigating white-collar criminals for a living. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, but he asked exactly the right questions about evidence preservation, chain of custody, and financial documentation. "This is substantial," he said after reviewing my analysis. "But we need to be careful about how we proceed. If Walsh is compromised, we have to assume the entire conspiracy is alert to investigation risks. One wrong move and they'll destroy evidence and flee. What do you recommend?" Sophia asked. "Undercover operation. Mason continues working normally while we gather additional evidence through surveillance and financial tracking. We'll need 3 to 4 weeks to build a prosecution-ready case." My stomach dropped. "You want me to go back there and pretend everything's normal while they're planning to steal another $250,000? "That's exactly what I want," Brennan replied. "Because if you change your behavior now, they'll know something's wrong. We need them confident and careless." Sophia leaned forward. "Can you handle that? Watching them operate while knowing what we know?" I thought about 8 years in the Navy dealing with hostile ports and uncooperative local contractors. I can handle it. "But what about Jennifer Walsh?" "Leave Walsh to us," Brennan said. "We'll monitor her communications and financial activity without alerting her. If she warns Wesley's team, we'll know immediately." The next 3 weeks were the most challenging of my professional life. Every morning, I walked into that office knowing exactly what Wesley and his team had stolen, exactly how much they were planning to steal, and exactly how they'd covered their tracks. Meanwhile, I had to act like the confused corporate executive who couldn't figure out why the integration was proceeding so poorly. Wesley grew increasingly confident as the days passed. He started treating me with open condescension rather than subtle hostility. "Maybe headquarters should have sent someone with more hands-on manufacturing experience," he suggested during one particularly frustrating meeting about vendor management. "You might be right," I replied, playing my role. "These local supplier relationships are more complex than I realized." Behind his smug smile, I could see him calculating how much more money he could steal before corporate replaced me with someone else. The hardest part was watching them set up their final major theft. Cole submitted requisitions for $85,000 in emergency equipment, repairs that would never happen. Grace processed invoices for $120,000 in client retention consulting from a company that existed only on paper. Zachary approved $67,000 for critical system upgrades that consisted of software they'd downloaded for free. Meanwhile, Agent Brennan's team was building their case. They'd traced the shell company bank accounts, confirmed the property purchases, and documented the money laundering network. Most importantly, they'd identified 4 additional Titan facilities where Jennifer Walsh had been providing similar consulting to local managers who were running their own fraud schemes. This wasn't just about Pinnacle. This was about a systematic corruption network that had cost Titan Industries nearly $30 million over 6 years. The breakthrough came during my 3rd week of undercover work. Cole Martinez approached me with an offer that made my blood run cold. "Look, Mason," he said, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "I know the integration isn't going smoothly. These corporate transitions are always messy, lots of confusion about vendor payments and expense approvals." "That's certainly true," I replied carefully. "What if I told you there was a way to make this easier for everyone? A way to streamline the vendor management process so you look good to headquarters?" He was trying to recruit me. After weeks of sabotaging my work and making me look incompetent, Cole was now offering to cut me into their fraud scheme. The audacity was breathtaking. "I'm listening," I said, knowing that Agent Brennan would want every detail of this conversation. "We work with some very efficient consulting companies. They handle paperwork, streamline approvals, eliminate bureaucratic delays. In exchange, they provide performance bonuses to the executives who help facilitate their contracts." Performance bonuses. That's what they called the stolen money. "How substantial are these bonuses?" I asked. Cole smiled like he was doing me a favor. "Substantial enough to make the integration headaches worthwhile." "Interested?" "Let me think about it," I said. "This kind of arrangement needs to be handled carefully. Of course, just remember, these opportunities don't last forever. The corporate transition window is closing." That night, I called Agent Brennan with details of Cole's recruitment attempt. "Perfect," he said. "We've got enough evidence for arrests, but this recruitment attempt shows clear criminal intent. We'll move tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning?" "Federal raid at 6 a.m. Be ready." I barely slept that night, knowing that in a few hours Wesley's criminal empire would come crashing down. After 5 years of stealing from honest employees and shareholders, after months of sabotaging my work and treating me like an incompetent outsider, justice was finally coming to Pinnacle Manufacturing. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd underestimated the quiet corporate executive so completely that they'd tried to recruit him into their own crime family. I arrived at the office at 5:45 a.m., parking across the street where I could see the main entrance. At exactly 6 o'clock, 4 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot with federal agents spilling out like something from a movie. Agent Brennan spotted me and nodded before leading his team through the front doors. By the time I walked inside, Wesley was already in handcuffs, his face white with shock as agents read him his rights. Rachel Bennett sat at her desk, staring at a search warrant, probably trying to figure out how her cryptocurrency investments were about to become evidence in a federal case. Cole Martinez kept asking what was happening, as if he genuinely couldn't understand why the FBI might be interested in his $180,000 boat purchased on a $55,000 salary. "Mason Ward," Agent Brennan called out, "we need you to walk us through the financial documentation." For the next 4 hours, I guided the federal team through Wesley's fraud network. They seized computers, hard drives, financial records, and boxes of fake invoices. The agents were methodical and professional, treating each piece of evidence like it could make or break their case. Wesley's arrogance finally cracked when Agent Brennan showed him the bank records for Advanced Logistics Solutions. This account received $1.7 million from Pinnacle over 3 years, Brennan explained. The deposits correspond exactly with your fake consulting invoices. Would you like to explain that? "I want a lawyer," Wesley replied, which was probably the smartest thing he'd said all morning. Grace Thompson started crying when they arrested her, claiming she didn't know the vendor payments were fraudulent. That might have been believable if they hadn't found her vacation rental property deed listing Wesley as a co-signer. Zachary Phillips just kept his mouth shut, probably calculating how much trouble he was actually in. The real surprise came when agents arrested Jennifer Walsh at Titan headquarters. Apparently, she'd been running similar consulting kickback schemes at 6 other facilities, taking a percentage of stolen money in exchange for advance warning about audits. Her computer contained detailed instructions she'd sent to various regional managers about how to hide fraudulent expenses and which budget categories were least likely to trigger corporate reviews. By noon, Wesley's entire operation was dismantled. The FBI had documented a criminal conspiracy involving $30 million in theft across multiple facilities, money laundering through shell companies, and systematic corruption of corporate oversight procedures. It was one of the largest white-collar crime cases in our industry that year. Sophia Hamilton arrived around 1 p.m. with Hunter Cross, Titan's CEO, and 2 federal prosecutors. We gathered in the conference room where Wesley used to hold his fake strategy meetings, and I presented the complete financial analysis of the fraud scheme. "Walk me through the detection process," Hunter said. "How did you identify patterns that our auditors missed?" "Navy training," I replied. "In logistics, when supply manifests don't match cargo inventory, you assume theft until proven otherwise. Same principle applies to vendor payments that don't match actual services received." One of the prosecutors leaned forward. "Your documentation is exceptionally thorough. Have you considered law enforcement work?" "No, but I've considered better corporate oversight systems." Hunter smiled at that. "Speaking of oversight, we need someone to run regional operations while we rebuild Pinnacle's management structure. Someone who understands both legitimate business practices and fraud prevention. Interested in a promotion?" That's how I became regional vice president for 6 states, with full authority to implement anti-fraud systems across all Titan facilities. The position came with a 40% salary increase, equity participation, and a mandate to prevent the kind of systematic theft that had cost our shareholders $30 million. The federal case moved faster than I expected. Wesley pled guilty to wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. He received 12 years in federal prison plus full asset forfeiture, the house, the investment portfolio, even his kids' college funds. Rachel Bennett got 7 years for her role in the shell company network. Cole Martinez received 5 years. Grace Thompson got 3 years probation. And Zachary Phillips cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for 2 years probation. Jennifer Walsh faced the harshest sentence: 15 years for corrupting corporate audit procedures at multiple facilities. The judge called her actions a betrayal of fiduciary duty that undermined the entire financial oversight system. Her cooperation helped prosecutors identify fraud networks at 12 other companies, leading to additional arrests and asset recoveries totaling $85 million. The efficiency improvements I'd originally recommended were finally implemented 8 months later, saving Titan $11.2 million annually. The board presents this as validation of their acquisition strategy, conveniently forgetting it took a federal investigation to make implementation possible. My new position involves overseeing $420 million in manufacturing operations across the Southeast. Every vendor contract gets verified through independent databases. Every consulting agreement requires measurable deliverables reviewed by separate departments. Every financial transaction over $10,000 triggers automatic audit flags that 3 different systems monitor simultaneously. It's not about micromanaging honest employees. It's about creating systems where dishonest employees can't operate without detection. The goal is transparency that protects everyone: shareholders, workers, and managers who play by the rules. 6 months after the arrests, I received a letter from Wesley in federal prison. He wanted to apologize and explain his actions, claiming financial pressures and poor judgment led him to make mistakes. I threw it away without reading past the first paragraph. Stealing $12.4 million isn't a mistake. It's a choice that destroys trust and hurts innocent people. The manufacturing facilities I now oversee report record efficiency and profitability. Employee satisfaction is up 23% because people know their work contributes to legitimate business success rather than funding someone's yacht payments. Client retention improved 18% because they're getting actual value instead of subsidizing a fraud scheme. What I learned from this experience is that corporate corruption thrives in environments where oversight is seen as interference rather than accountability. Wesley's team thought they were protecting their territory from corporate meddling. They never realized they were building a criminal enterprise that would eventually collapse under federal scrutiny. The best part isn't the promotion or the congressional testimony I gave about corporate governance reform. It's walking through our facilities knowing that every dollar gets tracked properly, every vendor provides real services, and every employee's honest work contributes to legitimate profit. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building systems that make the original offense impossible to repeat. In business, the greatest victory isn't destroying the people who wronged you. It's building systems so bulletproof that their tactics become obsolete and future generations of honest professionals never have to endure what you did. They thought my quiet observation meant weakness, but 25 years of experience had taught me that the loudest voices in the room are usually covering for the biggest problems, while the person taking notes is the one who actually understands what's happening.